All right, today's events have brought our nation into, quite frankly, uncharted territory, as there is no precedent of indicting a former president on criminal charges. Now, to be clear, President Trump's immoral behavior of the past really set in motion these wheels of political attacks that have been churning for years. Now, if he had governed the way he allegedly lived, as I said at the top of the program, we wouldn't be having this discussion because the left would have loved him. But he didn't. He actually governed from a conservative, even I would argue, at least those he surrounded himself with governed from a biblical perspective. But I'm going to focus on these charges and this process. And now that we can review the specific charges, what can we learn? Joining me now to discuss this and the process is Phill Kline, Associate Professor of Liberty University School of Law. He's also the former Attorney General for the state of Kansas. Professor Kline, welcome back to Washington Watch.
It's good to be with you, Tony.
All right, before we get into the details of the indictment, give us your reaction to today's events and the unprecedented nature of this.
Well, I'm deeply saddened. Unfortunately, we have seen increasing weaponization of government against political enemies, and that has meant the perfect storm of a nation, Tony, increasingly that looks to government for solutions to all problems. America tends to worship government today. So if there's a problem, we want to write a law to fix it, and a bunch of congressmen jump on board and write a new law. We have more laws than any nation in human history. We have so many criminal laws that the Congressional Research Service can't count them. And what that means is that a prosecutor who is bent with all of his authority and power to get a political enemy can find a crime. All they need to do is start pouring through those laws. And that's what's happening today. And that's what's happening to Mr. Trump.
I remember
these charges are charges that have been passed over by others, but the DA's picked them up.
Right. I remember as a police officer on the street, I could have pulled over any car based on some violation that almost every car, every driver is going to, whether it's a taillight, whether it's an inspection sticker, you can find pretty much probable cause to stop. But you don't do that because it just, unless there is a prevailing interest involved there. I want to go to these charges. 34 charges, all essentially the same, falsifying business records in the first degree. Tell us what that is first.
Well, essentially what it is that they're claiming that each check that Mr. Trump wrote to Mr. Cohen and identified it as legal fees was actually a form of an illegal campaign contribution to pay hush money to silence those who were accusing him in order to benefit his campaign. That's effectively what it is. So the 34 counts, it sounds like a lot of felonies. It's just each individual check is an individual count.
Mr. Cohen is the one who was convicted for lying and spent 3 years in prison. Is he a reliable? I mean, and I'm in all seriousness, the DA has made his case based on primarily Michael Cohen. I mean, I would think that he would be chewed up and spit out by the president's defense attorneys.
It's not that he's just been convicted of lying. It's that he's lied about this. You can find statements by Mr. Cohen where he diametrically opposes what he's saying now. So do you bring a case before a jury where you're requiring jury unanimity at the highest burden of law beyond a reasonable doubt based on the testimony of somebody who cannot testify consistently about the facts relating to this case? No, you don't bring that without other corroborating compelling evidence, and that's just not there. But of course, this is not being brought because Mr. Trump is a big threat on the loose to America. Even though these charges force him to face life in prison, he's not being charged because he's a threat and he's a danger on the streets. He's being charged because the DA doesn't like him, and can gain some political cred on this.
I would think it's even bigger. This is not so much about a political figure as I think a political movement that this figure represents.
I agree with you. You see that with the Department of Justice now and how they're treating different potential investigative targets based on really their political opinions and positions that they have taken. So we are creating a two-tiered system of justice in this country. We're making the same mistakes this nation has made in the past when it was motivated by racial animus, when it was motivated by gender issues, when it was motivated by those things other than recognizing that every single human being has intrinsic value. And that value is given by God, not government. So government doesn't have the right to diminish that value. We've converted ourselves. We now believe that it's the state that determines who has value. So the state can go after whomever it deems to be an enemy. I'm concerned that culturally, America now is in the place where we don't have enough people willing to stand for the freedom of those they disagree. And if you don't have a nation of people who are willing to stand for the free speech rights, the right of assembly, the right to petition government, all of those individual civil liberties, we don't have the ability to defend them for those we disagree, we're no longer going to be free.
Right.
All of our freedoms will dissipate over time.
Well, and I think
I'm concerned we're kind of at that threshold.
Well, and I think, when you get into a fight, so to speak, you go after the biggest guy first and you knock out the big guy and then the rest scatter. And I think that's a part of this, going after the president, making an example out of him. It will cause others to shrink back in silence when they need to speak up for the very reasons you just said.
And Tony, you've got it. The January 6th committee subpoenaed the Republican donor records of the Republican National Committee. That's a direct assault on a financial foundation of a political opponent. And they are using government to threaten those leaders in an opposing party and intimidate them in that fashion. 20 years ago, there would be no way this would be allowed in America, because we had a vibrant media and we had people who recognized these things. We don't right now.
Yeah, we are dangling by a thread dangerously over a raging fire as a nation, and it is time now to act. Professor Kline, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for all you do.